Hi, everyone, again. Thank you for joining. This session is called How to Build Scalable Load Testers. My name is Rachel Gibson, and I am joined by our presenter, solution architect Dan Ellis. Dan started his career as a Dieball and then later Synergy developer at one of the largest DBL software houses in Europe. He then moved to the States and worked as a developer at a food distribution ISV in Connecticut. After moving back to the UK in 2007, he served as a CTO at two local software houses. Since joining Synergex's professional services group in 2018, Dan has worked as a solutions architect on many modernization projects in industries such as distribution, banking, and hospitality.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I'm Dan Ellis. I'm a solutions architect with the PSG Group, and I'm here to talk a little bit about how I built a scalable load tester for a project that I was involved with, and how I had a little bit of help from one of my friends, ChatGPT. So, why did I need to do this? So, on the project I was working on, it was a customer ERP, typical ERP system, with lots of users in order entry. And we were hitting a scenario where the system just locked up and slowed to a crawl in production. And we didn't know why. So we tried quite a few things. We did a code review. We looked at all the file opens to see what was open for update and then checked all of the record locking in there. We did lots of manual testing to try to see if we could flush out the problem. And we ran some performance logging on the system and had a look and did some analysis of the logs, but we couldn't figure out what was going on this system. So it was suggested that maybe we could automate it, that some testing and simulate hundreds of users on the system to try to see if we could find out where the problem was. But how would we do that? What could we use for doing that testing, and how would we do it? The requirements that we came up with, the system was SSH build. It runs on Linux, so it needed to be a VT420 based solution. We need to be able to configure it. We need to be able to send in a list of customers and items and quantities. Most importantly, it needed to be scalable. We need to have simultaneous multiple users looking at multiple servers, and it needed to log the session details and the metrics. So the question was, how did we do this, and what language did we use to do this? So we did a little bit of Googling, and it seemed to be that Python was a popular language for doing this. I had a little discussion with Jeff, and he suggested, which is something that never occurred to me before, that we actually use AI to generate a lot of the code. There's a plethora of information out there about Python, and so ChatGPT knows a lot about it, and it'll actually suggest code to you, which I never knew. So the first thing we did was we needed to look to see if there were libraries and things like that available in ChatGPT to do this processing. So here's what we did. So I hopped over to ChatGPT. Now, there's a couple of different ways to gain access to it. If you've got an MSDN subscription, you get access to ChatGPT 4 via Bing, in a Bing chat. There is also a free version, which I believe is ChatGPT 3.5 at chat.openai.com. We'll pop into Copilot, as Microsoft have just recently rebadged it. One of the interesting options that you've got is if you want it to be more creative, more balanced, or more precise. I think the more creative option was described to me as being more hallucinogenic. So we're going to go for more precise for this instance. And we're basically going to ask it if there are any freely available Python libraries that can be used to screen scrape. So we'll ask it that question and see what it comes back and says. Oh, great. Okay, there are lots of different libraries to do that. Lots of different things to choose from, actually. Right, but it says they may not support VT420 emulation. So let's just ask it another question. ask it if there's any VT screen scraping in testing libraries. Oh, great, there is. And it's called Python. Okay. Excellent. So that sounds like a really good place to start. And it even tells you how to install it, which is great. Oh, what's it saying here? Yeah, we are going to need to use it with another library because we're going to need a transport layer as well. So with that decided, let's actually ask it how to write some code. One of the great things about using ChatGPT is that it remembers the context of the conversation you're having with it. So I've already asked it about Python, so I don't need to ask it again or mention about Python. I could just say, can you write some code for me? So I'm going to ask it the question now, can you write some code for me using Python and Paramiko, which is an SSH library, to connect to an SSH server, log in, wait for an application login prompt to be shown, and then type in a password and press enter. So off we go. Let's just have a little bit of a think about it. Okay, so here we go. It's actually produced me some code in here, look. Excellent. So what I'm going to do is, when that code's finished displaying onto the screen, I'm going to cut and paste it, grab it, and pop it into a Python program. So I've grabbed that code from ChatGPT and pasted it into a VS Code window. VS Code's brilliant for testing Python. It has a Python extension which I've already installed, which means you can run and debug the code directly in VS Code. So what I've done is I've taken the code, as I mentioned, verbatim, changed the host name to be localhost. I've got now, obviously I'm not running the customer's code on my system. I've got some old crusty code that I used to work on to test with, and it's running on a WSL instance in Ubuntu on my laptop. Set the port number, set the username and password that I need to use for logging into this SSH system. I've left the login prompt. This was just given to me as a sample by ChatGPT. And this is the code that it's given me to connect to the SSH client. So I'm using import basically pulls that library into Python. So Paramiko is the SSH client and Python manages the screen. As you can see here, it gives you really good documentation and context within VS Code. So, create a client object. I'm going to just tell it to log straight in and not to worry about matching the host keys. Connect up, get a channel, set a screen object for the screen coming back there, and receive some data. And then check to see if we've got the login prompt. And close with a little bit of exception handling. So what we can do is I'll press F5 there to run it. It says, what do you want to do? Run it with a Python debugger. It's a Python file. And then it'll run the Python directly in the terminal console for me. We can see it running there. And then boom. It's run. It hasn't finished running yet, but we can see the output that we got because we've got this print command here, which prints it to the screen, and we can see in here we've logged in and we've got a menu. Oh, that's great. Now the problem is at the moment it's stuck in there, and the reason it's stuck in there is because we left that login prompt to enter your password, and there's nothing on the screen there that says enter your password, so it's sat there waiting for that. So let's move on to stage 2 of our program. Okay, so what have we done now? So if you remember from the previous output that the menu said please select application to decide which menu entry the user wanted to do. So we've added a little bit of code here to check to see if the data that we got back from the terminal stream has something that says, please select application. And if we do, we're going to send a menu option, which in this case is menu option 3, order entry. And then once we get into there, we're going to go back and get some more screen data. And we're going to check to see if in that data, it has something that says option 1, order entry. And we're going to actually take the user into order entry. So if we have a look and run that, let's see what we get out of it. So again, it's launching Python for us. It's running our code. And look at that. We're in order entry. We've gone through, it's seen please select application. It's sent to 3, and it's taken us into the order entry screen. So now what we need to do is actually see how order processing works so we can drive it through the Python program. So here I am telnetted into the software. Here's the menu screen that you get. So we're going to do number 3, order processing, number 1, order entry, and it's going to run up order entry. So now we need to see what key presses are required to actually create an order. So it's pretty simple, really simple old piece of DBL software back from the 80s. So press enter to get a date, type in a customer number. Yes, it's the right customer. We just scroll down. We won't put any messages in or anything like that in. Are we okay? Everything okay on the customer screen? Yes, it is. Okay, now we need to start entering some products. So I'll enter a product code in there. Yep. How many of that product do we want? We want 1. Okay. And that adds a line to the order. And then we can do up arrow to create the order, or in this case, I'll do up arrow to create the order. And that's an order made. So now we have the steps that we need to actually make an order in the Python program. So let's go back and let's start adding those into the code. Right, so I've asked ChatGPT a few more questions. What we want to do is start modularizing and breaking our code down into functional units. So I've asked it about how things like functions work within there. It's quite interesting in Python. Generally, when I've looked at Python code, the functions are actually at the top of the code, but they don't get run unless they're called directly, which is a little bit strange to get your head around. Normally, you have your procedural code at the top and your functions or your subroutines down at the bottom or in different code altogether. But this seems to be the way Python does it. When I started this project, I wasn't a Python programmer. I still, I guess, wouldn't describe myself as a Python programmer. But the AI has helped me structure this code in a way that works really well. So what I've done is I've made a function to actually send data to the terminal, because obviously I'm going to do this quite often. What I've also introduced is a sleep in there, because we don't want to just blitz the terminal with key presses all of the time. We want to, act like we're a user, and there will be a little bit of a gap between keying things in the terminal program when we're using this interactively. Then I've added a function for actually processing the customer part of the data. So within here, it's based on the previous code that ChatGPT gave me, but now I'm doing things like getting the cursor position from the terminal stream, which is great now because this is how we can check where we are within the software. So I've gone through, I've looked at the cursor position. So if we're in 9,2, then we're in the date field. So we just send a return. We call the send data function to just send an enter to get a date. Then we move along and we're going to be at 30:2. So we're going to send a customer number, etc., in there. And then we're going to send a whole load of returns because we're not going to put any messages or anything like that in there. And then when we get to the end, we have a question that says, is everything okay? And we're going to send a return to that to say okay, and then break out of this function. I've taken this previous code in here where we were going through the menu and selecting the application. That is a function now. Close down routine and some error handling. Within there's the connection code. And then this is the first line that it gets to actually run. And it says process test. And one of the cool things about this as well, it works pretty much like Visual Studio. If I press F9 in here, I can set a breakpoint. And now if I run this code in, again, just press the F5 key, just like you would do within Visual Studio. You can see it's broken at that process test. Nothing's happened yet in the output in the terminal window. And again, I can just do F10 in there to run through. And there we go. We can see that it's gone through and it's processing the first screen. We got an error in here, which is interesting. I wonder why we did that. But we'll go and have a look and see how we can improve that. But we can see the screen output all came within there, and we got to the end of that screen, and the program has terminated. We're back at the prompt. So let's have a look and see why we've got some issues in there, and let's go and have a look at then adding the next screen in there. So as we saw from the previous screen, I got an error up in the output window, and I wasn't quite sure why that was. So I think what we could do is adding some logging to this program so that we can actually record what's going to screen in a log file. So in the same session that I've got with ChatGPT, I've just asked it, how do you implement logging in my program? So it's actually given me a really good example of how to do that. How to create a logger, how to create a file handler for it, how to set different logging levels, and then actually how to log different type of messages into the logger with a little bit of explanation of how all that works. So what I've done is I've taken all of that code and I've implemented it into the load tester program that I've got. What I've also added, I mentioned that we needed to up arrow before, so I've added a literal value for the up arrow key so I can send that to the terminal prompt. So I've created another function here to actually log the screen output to a log file whenever I run the program. So, and then I'm also adding that I've created in my function to send data, I've logged the data that I've sent to the terminal, and then I've created another function to receive the data back. So I kept coding that in the previous version because that's what ChatGPT had given me to receive data. But I've created a function for it now. And then again, every time I receive some data from the terminal stream, I can log it into the logger. And I'm also returning the X and Y coordinates from that function, so I can just check them straight away. So I've slightly updated the customer code now. I've got my receive data function in there instead of having manually getting it every time. So that'll log it each time as well. And I'm passing through, sending my information, hitting enter through all the messages and saying OK to do it. And then I'm actually processing, gone into the second part of it. So I'm adding an item to the order in here. Again, using the receive data function, just like I did. There's where I'm using my up arrow literal to send the up arrow key to finish off creating the order. And all of the rest of the code is the same, apart from in my main process routine here. I'm just setting up the log file name, removing a previous version of the log file if it's there, because I don't want it to append to the log file. I just want to create a new one. And then, as ChatGPT told me, setting the configuration of the log file. So I want sort of the timing as part of every line of the log file. And then I'm basically calling my three functions in here. My select the application from the menu, process the customer screen, and then process the line field, and then finish off. So let's run that and see what happens. Processing the first screen. All good. Processing the messages. So, yeah, it's okay to go to the next screen. Again, adding an item to the menu. And then the order's been assigned. And we're all finished. So now if we look in the folder where I'm running the load tester, you'll notice that we've got that load test.log file now, which is the output of the load test. So let's have a look in there. and we can actually see what happened within the load test. So there's my logging on to my WSL instance. Here's the menu screen being displayed. It hasn't finished yet, so we haven't got a cursor position yet. But here we go. We've got the full menu displayed now. So we can actually send the number 3 here. Once we get a proper cursor position, we know we're at the select application, so we're going to send a number 3. We come in here, we search, do we have an option for order entry? Yes, we do. So we send a number 1 in there. Now we're in order entry. We're chaining to it. And now we scroll through, looking at our screen coordinate. So we still haven't got a full screen here. We're still position 0, 0. Now we have. So now we can start sending the entries into the software and driving it through there. And one of the things that I noticed when I run when I looked at the log file before was that I'd put a sleep before sending the information, but I didn't have a sleep after that. So again, the system was going straight to get the string output, which in reality there would be another delay. So I've added a delay before and after the key input, which resolved the issues of it not seeing things correctly. And it's just like a user would be. You wouldn't be just sending 1372 really fast. There would be a pause as the user looked at the screen and decided what they were going to enter, or thought about the customer number that they were going to enter, or thought about the item number or the quantity that they were going to enter. So just making it work as though an actual user was driving this and not software. So yeah, we can just scroll down. We can see all the entry on the screen. We're in the item number now. Down we go, down we go. Entering a quantity number, sending the up arrow, and then we get an order number, and we've successfully created an order in the program. Now, obviously, that's great. We can drive that program now, but everything's hard-coded, which we don't want it to be. We actually want it to work from configuration. So let's add that to the software now. Again, I have no clue how to load JSON files and parse the values in Python. So I've asked ChatGPT again, how do you load JSON array values from a JSON file? It knows the context of my conversation is about Python, so I don't even need to tell it it's about Python. And it's given me some handy-dandy little code to show me how to open a file, your file.json, and then load the data in. It's really simple. I just need to make sure that I import the JSON library into the code. So I've gone ahead and done that in my main loop now. I've got my current directory, and then I've opened up my credentials file, loaded my credentials into a list called credential data, and then I've opened up my test data and loaded that up into another array called test_data. So if I look back into here, have a look at that JSON file. I've just got an object called credentials, and then an array with the username and password, my username, and then within my test data, I've got an array of customers and products in there that I can iterate through. And obviously, as you build the load tester up, you can add more and more customer and products, you can add quantities in, or you can start randomizing. And the same thing with credentials, which we'll show in a moment. You can add more credentials to log more users in. The other most important thing that we need to do is we need to be able to do multiprocessing. So again, I've asked ChatGPT how to do that. And I basically make a multiprocessing queue, tell it a routine to call, called process data, and then add the processes to that multiprocessing queue and execute it. So if you see in here, I'm basically reading all of my credentials in, reading all of my test data into that and putting those into an object to put on the queue as well. And if I move up to the top, I've created an object for my order item within there. And then here's the multiprocessing logic that gets called by the multiprocessing queue. So I send in a host name, a username, and a password, and my items list, and also the logger, so I can log to that because I want to create a separate logger for each session. So the code is the same. It's the code that I've written before. Here's all my SSH connection code. Here's me setting up the screen IO. Here's me calling the select application. So I go into the order entry program, but here's where it differs. So now I'm going to iterate through all the items in my item array, and I'm going to call process customer to do it for the first customer in my list. I'm going to call process line to call it for my first product in my list. And then I've added another function now to come out of the order entry program and go back to the first screen so that I can then start entering another order. And then I check for a state. So this checks to see if the order's complete. And if I'm finished with it, I then go to the logout screen and log myself out. So if we run that for the current configuration, we shall see that it's now been driven by that data that we put in those configuration files. So off it goes. And if we look in the load tester directory, we'll see we're getting a new file here for our user Frank. And if we actually put that into Notepad++, we'll see it keeps appending to that. We'll go back to Python. It's now processing the second order in there. See, it keeps appending to the file. Now that program's run, if we look in the output directory, we'll see that we've got a log file for load test Frank, which was the username. We're going to create a log file for each username that logs into the system. And if we have a look at that, we can see that it was driven from our config. So we logged into the system for the first time in order entry, and we created an order for customer 210, and which is what we had in our configuration. And then we created an item for product code 100066. That all went through, was assigned. We got an order number. We came back to the main screen, and then we started again for the next customer. So this time we did an order for customer 2020, sorry. Once we got through to the next screen, we added a line item for product code 10058 for quantity number 1. And we came back to the screen and we actually had a bit of an error. We created the order fine, as we could see there, but we didn't quite do our error handling properly because we tried to enter a date in there. And we tried to enter a 99 in there, which is to exit the system. So we hadn't quite checked to see if we got back to the main menu correctly. So we'll correct that in the next version. So the last crucial part to this project is being able to test with multiple users at multiple times. So as you saw before, when we load the credentials in, we can actually load the credentials into an array, and we can send those into the processing loop. So within the credentials.json file, I've edited that, and I've created a second username in there. So now when we load that and we fire that at the processor, we'll actually get both of these users logged in and entering an order, and that's actually extensible. You can within the customer project that we did, we added 500 of these credentials into the system, so we had 500 people creating orders at the same time. So with that done, I'll run the program again. And one interesting thing is if you look in the call stack now, you can see multiple sub-processes running, and you can actually see in the output window that that there are, you can see the text overwriting each other as it logs one user to the other. And now look at this. We've got a record locked error because we've got two users trying to use the order entry screen at the same time. So that one user is going okay. We can see that they've created an order, but one user isn't. So we've actually managed to replicate a record locked issue through our program. So we'll just leave that to run through a little bit longer, and we'll have a look and see what the log situation looks like. So one user seems to be processing okay and making orders, but the other one has just hung up with a record locked. You can see this, that we're still getting a record locked on the orders file. So we'll stop that process. And if we go back into the load testing directory, you can see now that we've got a load test file for Frank and we've got a load test file for Gordon. So if we have a look at Frank's load test file, we can see that they were okay. They managed to make an order. Oh, they managed to make two orders, sorry. Now if we look at Gordon's log file, we search down through there, we can see that it managed to get into the order entry program correctly, but as soon as it started entering some text within the order entry program, it got a record locked error. And even though in the code I coded it to send a return to continue, it was never able to continue. It just kept within the record lock loop all of the time. Because as I mentioned, this particular program dates back from the 80s and hasn't been changed much, and it just locks the orders file as soon as a customer enters order entry. So this wasn't a real world example of what we use the load tester for, but it's an example of how to create a load tester and get it to a scalable load tester that can run multiple sessions against an SSH application. It's configurable. So when we ran it on the customer site with 500 logins, we were able to get performance metrics out of the system, have a look at how the I/O was going, and track down the problem that way. So that's just a short example of how to create a scalable load tester using Python, and how it really helps being able to use ChatGPT to answer all your questions and actually to create your code. As I mentioned, it's not a real world example. It's just using some old crusty code that I had lying around. But I think the principle still stands that you can scale this load tester up. You can add more and more users, more and more customers, more and more products, so that you can actually get it to, creating thousands and thousands of orders in a single session. What you can also do, we ran this on a Windows server, but you can have multiple services if you want. Just feed it different config on each server if you need to scale it up even more. So I'll make the call available somewhere after this session's gone through, so you've got an example of how I did it. But without further ado, are there any questions about that process?
All right, let's move to some questions. Did you experience any bugs in the AI code?
Yes, I did, and it was quite actually a little bit heartening to find that ChatGPT didn't always get it right. The initial code. Yeah. So I'm not completely redundant as of yet. Anyway, it gave me incorrect terminators for checking the input back, which took me a little bit of head scratching to figure out why the code didn't work. And I actually mentioned it to Steve Ives, and Steve said, "Well, you should tell it that it gave you incorrect code. Give it some feedback." So I did, and it did apologize back to me, but it also told me that I never told it that it was running on Linux, and that's why it gave me the wrong answer. It gave me the Windows answer. So it's definitely worth feeding back into the AI as well.
It looks like Jason gave us a question. People still use text-based systems for order entry.
Yes, they do. Amongst many other things.
Hey, it still works, and that's what matters. It works.
Yeah, well, I couldn't use, obviously, it was a customer project. I can't share those details like Billy said on Monday. That's there. So I actually had to find some old code that I used to work with and port it to Linux so that I could run this demo.
Yeah, when Dan agreed to do this presentation, I don't think he fully thought of what he was signing up for, but he managed to get it done. So thank you, Dan.
No problem.
Okay, so can you introduce randomness into the load tester?
Yeah. The easiest way to do that is there is a randomized function in Python. I just checked with ChatGPT. So you can actually just throw your JSON array data at it and ask it to randomize it, which is great. Or if you want to do things like randomize order quantities, you can just pick a random number between a certain range as well.
Awesome. Will this work with Synergy Toolkit programs?
Yes, it will. Yeah, as long as you're running them over SSH. So even if you normally run them in Windows, you can compile your toolkit programs to run under SSH, and then it will do. But if you're running them actually in a Windows as a Windows form, it will not work. So you would need to run them as under SSH, and then it would work.
Oh, a question from Dawn. Can you think of any use cases for this type of utility?
Yeah, you can use it for regression testing as well. So one of the things that I want to do with this code is actually make it more parameterized, so you can actually feed it, question response type of things as well. So you don't have to hard code prompts and things like that within it, and use it for different functionality within the software. But so that you could actually just run it, as part of a set of regression tests.
And Chris, another question from Chris. I assume you could do something similar with C# and Renzi. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But.
Yeah, you could. It was just, as I say, we researched it, and it seemed to be that Python was used for this a lot. And what really helps is that Python library, because it actually keeps, it does all of the decoding of all the VT XXX sequences and gives you a, that's why Jeff's just answered as well. And it gives you like a screen that you can just search through. So that the Python library is sort of the key component to that.
Zan, if somebody, you mentioned in your presentation that you would make your code available. If somebody was interested, what's the best way to contact you for that?
Easiest thing is email. Is just send me an email. So dan.ellis@synergex.com.